Back in June, a new entry in the Fire Emblem series was leaked online. The game was rumored to be a celebration of the series' history, featuring characters from past installments. And in the most recent Nintendo Direct, the game was officially announced as Fire Emblem Engage. With Engage still months away from release, and the previously released 30th Anniversary Edition now only available on the secondary market with less than reasonable prices, I decided to celebrate one of my favorite game series by fully recreating the original game in 3D. Now this project can be broken down into two parts. First is the modeling, which includes turning the map and character sprites into voxel models. Second was the game mechanics, which includes the inventory system, the enemy AI, and of course the actual battle mechanics. For modeling, I used Magica Voxel, since other remake projects have used it as well, and then I got to work on modeling Marth. The NES game had battle and overworld sprites for each character, so I planned on using the more detailed battle sprites for models, but Marth looked pretty uncanny, so then I tried to use the overworld sprites, and that managed to look even worse, so I needed a new plan. Luckily, I stumbled upon an old Fire Emblem Heroes video that was made to celebrate the 30th anniversary. The sprites used in this video felt like they fit better for a voxel art style, so I made Marth one more time. And I think it was a big improvement over the other versions, so this was the art style I used for the project. With Marth complete, now I can move on to set up the map information in Unity. The map in the NES game affected a lot of things, and it can get pretty complicated, so here's a breakdown on how I did it. First, I made a class that would contain all the important details for each tile, things like the position and if the terrain was grassland or a mountain top. Then I overlaid an image of the game map on a flat plane. This image would be the blueprint for the actual scale of the map. After that, I applied a technique where I combined a bunch of 2D tile maps together, with each tile map representing one of the terrain types. Finally, on each tile map, I used Unity's grid paint tool to fill in the correct spaces, so all I really had to do was color inside the lines. Fun fact, did you know Fire Emblem coloring books exist? 'Cause they do. With a little extra code, the tile maps would generate the details for all 403 spaces on the map and hold that in a scriptable object. That scriptable object would control the pathfinding for the units, and with that, the map was done. It was time to set up the inventory system. But before I could do that, I needed to make a way to show the inventory. Fire Emblem has a lot of UI and text, so I made a scalable background in Sprite, and then in Unity, I set the image to tiled so it wouldn't deform when I added words or images. For the weapons, I used another scriptable object that held details like attack power, range, and a unique item code. The item code would be used by the inventory manager to add and remove the weapons from the units. Added items are then shown in a player's inventory. With the inventory set up, I wanted to add the font from the NES game, but no version I could find online had lowercase letters. So I made my own pixel letters and used a site called Calligrapher to turn them into a font. After uploading the file, the font looked good string together. And it looked even better in game. Now Marth could say things like subscribe and make more models. Obeying Marth's orders, I made models for the Knight Trog, the Archer Gordon, and the Curate Reese. Then, I went back to the inventory system. Now I needed to combine the text and UI to show a unit's inventory and stats when selected. The old game was complicated because it required 3 button presses to get to the action menu. For the code, I set up a superclass called Selectable. This selectable class would have common functions for left and right clicks. Then, each menu that is selectable would override these functions to perform their unique actions. By assigning a selectable when it was enabled to the mouse buttons, making the menus was actually pretty easy. And in game, left-clicking would progress the menus and right-clicking would exit them. So that was a lot of information. Let's look at some more models. This time I made Cain and Abel. They have different hairstyles, but that's about it, and I also added an idle animation. I think the idle animations added a lot of character, and they also doubled as movement animations for travel on the overworld. I did make one quality of life change that wasn't in the original game. More recent Fire Emblem games, when you select a unit, it shows a highlight of where they can move, so I also added that to this version. With most of the backend set up, I wanted to move on to the battle system. Fire Emblem combat has 3 stages. The first is targeting an enemy. In stage 2, a battle cutscene plays where damage is dealt, and stage 3 is awarding the EXP and level ups. Starting from the top, I modified the old pathfinding code to work with melee, distance, and dual range weapon types. Then I set up more selectable menus and a selection tool like in the original game. And since I hadn't made any actual enemy models yet, I had Reese turn to a life of crime to make sure that the targeting actually worked. I also added the ability to check enemy stats and made it so that players can't move through enemy spaces. Before moving on, I made models for 3 more units. The Pirate and the Hunter were the first enemy models, and on the player team, the old Paladin Jagan was made as well. For the battle system UI, I used the same setup as other menus, but one change was the inclusion of sliders. Fire Emblem UI has 2 bars to show a character's health. If a character has more than 26 health, the second bar will appear. I'm not even sure why I did this since no character in the first chapter uses the second bar, but it's there. When a battle happens, all the damage and hit rates are calculated before the cutscene plays, and the formulas here are straight from Kaga himself. So when the UI pops up, the only thing that the code controls is the text and the smooth health draining. That's it for the actual battle code. At this point, we had most of the character models, but I wanted to start making the game look 3D, so I started with some models for the forests and grass. For the water, since most 3D games usually have cool water shaders, I wanted to make one as well. I made my project in the built-in pipeline, and in order to use shader graph, you need to have a URP or HDRP project. So I upgraded to the universal render pipeline, and some of the materials broke during the update. Luckily, Unity has an easy way to upgrade a standard shader to a URP shader. In the edit tab, you can find a setting under render pipeline that can upgrade your shaders, and that fixes the problem. I wasn't that familiar with shader graph, so I followed a simple Brachy tutorial to set up the basics. Then I added it to game. With the water added, the map started to have a plastic toy look that reminded me of Nintendo Land for the Wii U, and next I made models for the house, the armory, and the fortress. To avoid clipping between the units and structures, I added some alternate models that would appear on the overworld and for combat. Speaking of combat, since this remake is a 3D project, I wanted to implement the smooth map to battle camera transitions that modern Fire Emblem games have been using for battles. The method I came up with is pretty brute force, but it works for both melee and ranged battles. The code really just takes in the player's position and the enemy's position, and depending on the distance, changes the field of view if it's more than one space away, and it also changes the angle if it needs to be on a diagonal for ranged attacks as well. I also like the idea of the camera zooming in when a unit entered a structure, so after modeling the village, I modified the battle cam code to follow the player into villages and houses while the dialogue played. And I also added it to the armory while the player shopped for new weapons. Also, I forgot to mention it before, but level ups were easy. I just added the growth rates and made an event system call. Even with the new battle cam, things still looked pretty flat, so I created the coast tiles to add some depth. And when combined with the water shader from earlier, things started to look pretty good. The main gameplay of selecting units and having those units visit villages or attack enemies or heal allies were all in. And after adding the thief, I planned on getting him to rob the village, but then I realized there was no enemy AI, so I needed to fix that. While looking up how the AI made decisions, I found out that the enemies will always target Marth if they can. Well, except when they don't. What? Things started out pretty rough, but by using Marth favoritism, I was able to set up a convincing recreation of the original AI, and on an enemy's turn, it would activate them one by one until all of them were done. The code structure was pretty simple and had enemies make decisions based off of a set of behaviors. For example, defending enemies move to a location and then go to a guard state, while pillage enemies block village entrances or rob them if they have the thief class, and when enemies attack, they either target Marth if they can, or the unit with the lowest defense if they can't. With the end of the project in sight, I wanted to finish up the map, so I made the mountain and peak models, and I quickly realized that the elevation would be a problem, so I added some gravity to fix that. Collisions wouldn't be a problem for peaks since flyers are the only ones who can navigate them, so I made the peaks taller using ProBuilder's Polyshape tool. The final map model was the castle, and I personally think this one came out the best. The map was now fully modeled, and I took a quick fly around with the Unity camera, but then I thought, hey, how cool would it be if I flew around as a Pegasus Knight? So I made the last voxel model for Sita, and as simple as it was to make her fly, this was definitely one of my favorite parts of the project. It was really cool to just kind of fly around in a 3D Fire Emblem map. I added some finishing touches like the cutscene dialogue and victory conditions, and the project was complete. I made a fully playable chapter of the original Fire Emblem game in 3D. Now I won't drag this out. I had a lot of fun making this project, and if you have any questions on how I did anything, feel free to ask. Since this is my first edited YouTube video, any feedback is welcome, so thanks for watching, and bye.